Okay, so let's get into this. We're looking at a time that just completely reshaped the world, the Industrial Revolution.
Mm.
Imagine this, it's the late 1700s going into the 1800s, and you see entire families leaving farms, crowding into these huge, smoky cities.
All for factory jobs.
Exactly. And today, we're going to unpack why children became such a crucial, but also a really vulnerable part of this whole new economy.
It really all came down to efficiency. Factory owners, they needed a few maximum output, minimum cost.
And that meant workers had to be chipped.
Super cheap, easy to manage, easy to replace. And, well, children fit that perfectly. They were small, which, strangely enough, was a big advantage with how the first machines were designed.
And the pay.
Oh, the pay was tiny. Maybe a sixth of what an adult man would make.
And we have to remember the desperation here. For so many families, the parents' wages just weren't enough. Not enough to buy food or pay rent in these new expensive cities.
Right. So every penny a child earned wasn't for toys or anything. It was for survival.
It was the difference between the families staying together or just falling apart.
And that just kicks off this awful cycle where, hard labor completely replaces any chance of an education for these kids.
So let's start in the textile mills. These were kind of the birthplaces of mass production.
Yeah.
Just picture these massive brick buildings filled wall to wall with these huge spinning frames, power looms, all running at once.
The noise alone was unbelievable. A constant, deafening roar of machinery that we know caused permanent hearing damage.
And you couldn't even talk over it.
No, absolutely not. And the thing is, these machines had to run all the time to make the most profit. If you stopped the line to clean or fix something, you're losing money.
And it wasn't just the noise. What about the air they were breathing?
That was a huge problem. The air was full of cotton dust, just this fine white powder that got into your lungs day after day.
For how long? 12 hours.
12, sometimes 14 hours in a single shift. Breathing that in was basically a guarantee you get a serious lung disease later on.
And in these conditions, kids were expected to do these very specific, very dangerous jobs that an adult just couldn't do.
Right, because of their size.
Let's talk about the scavengers.
Yeah.
This job was for the smallest kids, right?
Yeah, usually the youngest. Their job was to literally crawl under the giant moving machinery to pick up scraps of loose cotton.
While it was running.
While it was running. That was the whole point. You couldn't stop the machine, so the child had to time their movements perfectly, darting in and out between the moving parts.
Wow. One mistake.
And you could be crushed or lose a limb. It happened all the time.
Then there were the piecers. What was their role?
The piecers had to stand or lean over the running machines to quickly tie together threads that had snapped.
So really nimble fingers needed for that.
Extremely nimble. And they had to do this thousands of times a day. It was this constant, repetitive motion that put just immense strain on their growing bodies.
Standing for hours, bent over in these weird positions.
Exactly. It led to all sorts of long-term problems. Curvature of the spine, permanent damage to their joints. They were basically trading their future health for a few pennies a day.
Okay, so let's shift from the mills
Yeah.
to something else entirely.
Right.
Let's go deep underground into the coal mines.
Right. And coal it was the fuel of the Industrial Revolution. It powered everything, the factories, the trains, it heated the cities.
So getting it out of the ground was essential.
Absolutely. And that meant working deep down in these tunnels that were dark, damp, and often incredibly narrow, sometimes just 3 feet high.
The dangers down there were just everywhere.
Oh, completely. You had falling rocks, the risk of tunnels flooding, and then you had gas explosions.
Fire damp.
Fire damp, exactly. A spark could ignite a pocket of methane gas, and it would be catastrophic.
And the kids working down there, they were on 10-hour shifts, sometimes more.
Mm.
So in the winter, they'd go down into the mine before the sun came up and come out after it set. They might not see daylight for weeks.
And just like in the mills, the air was a huge problem. Breathing in coal dust all day, every day, led to this terrible disease called black lung. It crippled miners later in life.
So what were the specific jobs for kids in the mines? The youngest ones were trappers.
Yeah, the trappers. Their job was to sit alone in the pitch dark for hours.
Doing what?
Just opening and closing a wooden door. It was a ventilation door, so it controlled the airflow through the tunnels and let the coal carts, the wagons, pass through.
Sitting alone in the dark for 10 hours.
Complete darkness. Any kind of candle or lamp was a risk for an explosion. It was just psychological torture, really. The isolation must have been terrifying.
The older kids.
The older kids were the hurriers. And this was unbelievably grueling work.
They were the ones pulling the coal carts.
Exactly. They wore a leather belt around their waist, and a chain was attached that went between their legs, and they used that to drag these heavy carts of coal along tracks.
But the tunnels were low, you said.
Often so low they couldn't stand up, so they had to crawl on their hands and knees, dragging these loads that could weigh several tons over a whole day.
The physical toll of that must have been immense.
It was. It caused raw skin, severe joint damage, and permanent back deformities from being in that unnatural position all day long.
So all this work, whether it's in the mill or the mine, it's paying a huge price on a child's health.
A massive price. Physically, their growth was often stunted, from a lack of sunlight, poor nutrition.
And the repetitive motions created all these deformities you mentioned.
Yeah.
Bowed legs, curved spines.
Right, and those became permanent disabilities.
And accidents were just a part of life. There were no safety guards on machines, no real rules.
No. Broken bones, lost fingers. These were horrifyingly common. And if you lost a hand, you couldn't work. You immediately became a burden on your family.
It's just a devastating outcome.
And then there are the internal issues, the lung diseases from all the dust. Without any real medical care, many of these children just didn't survive to adulthood.
And beyond the physical toll, what about their future? What about education?
There was none. I mean, most of these kids never saw the inside of a school. They spent their best learning years doing manual labor.
Education was seen as a luxury.
Absolutely, a luxury the working class couldn't afford. Even when some of the first laws required, say, a couple of hours of schooling, the kids were too exhausted from a 12-hour shift to learn anything.
Right. So you end up with generations of workers who can't read or write.
And without those basic skills, you can't get a better job. You can't negotiate for better pay. You're trapped.
It just continues the cycle of poverty into the next generation.
It does. And the pay structure itself just reinforced the whole system. Kids earned, a few pennies for a full day's work?
And that money went straight to their parents.
Every time. And some factories had this really exploitative system where instead of cash, they'd pay workers in vouchers.
Vouchers for the company store, I assume?
Exactly. The only place you could spend them was the company store, where prices for things like flour and coal were way higher than anywhere else, so the owner profits from your labor and from selling you food.
It keeps the workers in debt to the company.
It's a trap. And some children weren't even paid at all. They were apprentices who just got, some poor quality food and a place to sleep for their work.
So how did this finally change? I mean, how did society break this system?
Well, slowly. Over time, people started to realize just how cruel it was. You had reformers, doctors, church leaders, politicians who started speaking out.
They campaigned for new laws, right?
They did, but it was a huge fight. Factory owners argued that any limits on child labor would ruin the economy.
So the first laws were probably pretty weak.
Very weak. The first so-called Factory Acts in Britain, they only applied to cotton mills. They said, no kids under 9 should work, and they limited older kids to 12 hours a day.
But how do you enforce a law like that?
That was the problem. They were almost impossible to enforce. They created these roles, factory inspectors, but you'd have maybe 4 or 5 inspectors for thousands of factories.
So the owners could just hide the kids when an inspector came around?
All the time. They'd hide them or just lie in the record books. For many years, enforcement was a total failure.
So what was the turning point? What finally forced real change?
The big shift came with these official government investigations in the 1830s and 40s. These weren't just casual visits. Commissioners went into the mines, onto the factory floors, and they documented everything.
And they talked to the children themselves.
That was the crucial part. They interviewed the kids and wrote down their stories word for word.
And when those reports were published?
It caused a public outcry. I mean, when people in the middle class read the testimony of a 7-year-old girl describing the pain of dragging a coal cart, it turned indifference into outrage.
That outrage becomes a political force.
A powerful one. It gave politicians the evidence and the public support they needed to pass much stricter laws.
And that led to some very specific changes, like the law about mines.
Yes, the Mines and Collieries Act of 1842. It was a direct result of one of those shocking reports, and it was a game changer. It banned all women and all boys under 10 from working underground. Period.
That's a huge step.
Yeah.
But it didn't end child labor overnight.
No, it took decades more. Many more laws, much more campaigning. But what really finished it off were 2 big connected forces.
First was technology.
Right. As machinery got more complex, steam systems, automation,
Yeah.
you needed skilled workers to run it. You needed people who could read, do math, understand mechanics. Uneducated child labor just wasn't as useful anymore.
So the economic incentives started to fade.
It did. And the second force was the push for compulsory education. Reformers argued that a modern country needed an educated population. So governments started passing laws that said children had to be in school.
And if they have to be in a classroom, they can't be in a factory.
Exactly. It became illegal, and it just wasn't practical for the owners anymore.
So that shift from labor to education, it really redefined what it even means to be a child.
It completely changed it. Childhood became a time for learning and development, not just work.
So as you think about all this history, it's not just about the long hours in the factory. Think about where these families were living.
Crowded towns, built too fast, often with no sanitation, no clean water.
So imagine how quickly disease could spread in a place like that. An outbreak of cholera or typhus would just rip through a community where everyone was already exhausted and malnourished. So when the reformers succeeded, it wasn't just a moral victory. It was a massive public health achievement that really shaped the way we protect children today.
A truly fundamental change for society.
Good luck with your studies, and keep digging into those details.
See you next time.